This past Wednesday, we had the second meeting of our Sacred Reflecting group. This is the one that meets at 6 p.m. before prayer service. It was really cozy. Sherry and Annette on the couch, Hiva on the big red chair, me on the floor with a pillow in my lap, and Chris, Ken, and Shirley on the Zoom screen. I think one of the things that makes this group feel so cozy is that we've all made several agreements with one another. We agreed that this is a no judgment, no advice zone, where we will always speak from our own perspective and experiences. This means that it's a space where your story will be received with listening and compassionate ears. Now, one more thing you need to know about this group is that it is contemplative. And because of that, I make it clear that whatever you discover about yourself in written reflections is yours alone. I assure everyone that in terms of sharing with the group, there's always an invitation and never an expectation. Frank Rogers' book itself is an invitation to explore whatever it is that gets in the way of access to the compassionate God, access to self-compassion, and access to compassion for others. This may take some of us on journeys that are too deep or too tender to share. So sharing is not the point. Doing the reflecting is the point. So on Wednesday, after we took some time, all of us, to reflect on our early understandings of Jesus and God, I reminded the group of my catchy little saying, always an invitation, never an expectation. And yet, the stories came pouring out, one after another. Annette shared, and then Sherry, and then Chris from way out in Lake Elsinore, and then Hiva from the comfy red chair, and me from the floor. Boom, boom, boom. I want to share my story. Please listen to my voice. For me as a pastor, there's really nothing better than that. Individuals making themselves vulnerable enough to speak about their experiences. Other individuals listening intently. We need both to really connect, the desire to tell and the desire to listen. Parker Palmer uses a wonderful phrase. He talks about people who hear others into speech. These moments of beautiful human connection happen when the willingness to share meets the willingness to listen. Well, in today's passage, Jesus hears the blind man, Bartimaeus, into speech. Jesus' presence calls out the essence of Bartimaeus, and his essence, his deepest self, is not his blindness. It is his belief. When he realizes he is in the presence of the Son of God, he shouts. He doesn't think through anything logically, weighing the possibilities and the probabilities. He responds instinctively to the overwhelm of being in the presence of God. He believes. He shouts his belief. And because he believes, he asks, or rather, he commands, Son of David, he says, have mercy on me. The English translation is not nearly as charming as the original. The verb form that means have mercy on me is in the original language in the accusative case. In English, this is like using a verb that takes a direct object. So what Bartimaeus is really saying to Jesus is, mercy me, where mercy is a verb. Mercy me, Jesus. The directness of this is wonderful, I think. It suggests the intimacy that is created when belief is strong and sure. It suggests that Jesus could transfer the essence of himself, his mercy, directly to his believers. Think of the sentence, the potter molds the clay. This means that the potter transfers all of his skill and talent to the clay directly. The clay receives all of it without intermediary and is transformed. Well, Bartimaeus is asking Jesus to do this to him, to use his divinity to transform Bartimaeus directly with no intermediary. Mercy me, Jesus. And then what happens? Intermediaries enter, like static interrupting a perfectly clear signal. Mark says, many sternly ordered him to be quiet. The disciples still don't get it. They don't get that the Jesus they are following is a disruptor. Jesus calls the children and makes them exemplars of the children. Jesus elevates the servant and debases his own God self. Jesus uplifts the poor. The disciples don't readily embrace this revolutionary nature of Jesus. They continue to try to preserve decorum. They are not exemplifying kingdom values here. But what I love about this story is that here it doesn't matter because the blind man shouts them down. Mark says, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." The blind man on the side of the road begging knows his value to Jesus because he believes who Jesus is. Son of David, he says, mercy me. And then Jesus stops moving, turns to Bartimaeus and says, I want to hear your story. I want to hear your voice. Come to me. And then, of course, Bartimaeus is healed and he sees again and he follows Jesus. I want to make 2 points about the climax of this story, about Jesus calling Bartimaeus to him and healing him. I'll make the obvious point first. It must have felt great to be able to see again. That's the obvious point, but maybe also the harder point to really imagine, unless you too have been cured of blindness. I can't imagine the joy. But I wonder if this little anecdote will help. We've all heard and probably used the sentence, I feel like I've got a new lease on life. This means I thought something was coming to an end, but then I felt renewed, and now my time or my joy or my energy has been extended. Well, a few months ago, on a Zoom chat, a young man I'm acquainted with wrote the following words, intending, I'm assuming, to say that he felt he'd gotten a new lease on life. What he actually wrote was, I feel like a new leaf on life. And I loved that because it does not at all express the same thing as lease. A new leaf is indeed new life, not a renewal of what was already in existence, but something fresh. To feel like a new leaf on life is to be able to start life all over again, to appear on the scene green, growing, thrilled by the rustling of the air and the feel of the sun. And that's, I think, how Bartimaeus must have felt. Like a new thing, thrilled by the light communicating itself to his new leaves, his new eyes. The second point I want to make about the climax of this story is much less obvious, but probably much easier for us to identify with. And that is that it must have felt so good to hear Jesus say, I want to hear your voice. Tell me your story. And it's not just that Jesus was like, sure, this is a convenient time. It's totally what we already had on the agenda today, and I think it'll make everyone happy. No, they were walking, they were traveling, they're trucking down the Jericho road, they're going places on an itinerary. And the disciples are like, pipe down, beggar man. We don't have time. Stop shouting. But Jesus disrupts his schedule and frustrates the expectations and mores of these conventional disciples, all in the service of hearing the blind beggar's voice. Jesus said, you will not silence him. Jesus said, I want to hear his story. That, folks, that too was a healing, and one that many of us are in need of. How many of us have felt that no one listens to us? Maybe people dismiss your voice because it is still young and soft, or because its tenor has faded over time, or because your generation is stereotyped as useless, irrelevant, selfish, corrupt. Maybe people dismiss your voice because you are a woman and considered less intelligent, less capable, or weak. And maybe you're a woman of color, and the discrimination against you is doubled, sexism on top of racism. Maybe people dismiss your voice because you are differently abled and excluded from the conversation entirely because you can't speak, can't hear, can't see, aren't mobile. Maybe people dismiss your voice because what you say disrupts the status quo that the Shush-ers benefit from. Maybe people dismiss your voice, but Jesus doesn't. This is a story about amplifying the voices of the marginalized. And it's also a story about who needs to practice being quiet, who needs to stop gatekeeping who gets to speak. The disciples set themselves up as just such gatekeepers, and Jesus says very clearly, get out of the way. Just as there are folks out there who need to know that Jesus wants to hear their story, there are folks out there who need to hear that the spiritual growth they need involves accepting the fact that shushing and gatekeeping isn't their job. Reflect on who you are in this story. Are you Bartimaeus, shouting to be heard? Are you Jesus, opening the kingdom wide for the stories of the hurting? Are you the disciples, guarding the kingdom gates and shushing the disruptors? And if you are the shushing disciples, hogging the mic, practice turning down your own volume and turning up the mic for others. If you're Jesus, find ever more creative ways of putting yourself in the way of those who need to be heard. And if you are Bartimaeus, God bless you. Keep shouting and help others shout too. Amen.